In this video, I'm going to show you a quick and easy paint job for the tallest hobbit of them all, Bandobras Took the Bull Roarer. Welcome to Zobazov Gaming, my name's Lachlan Linton Keane and welcome to the latest installment of our Middle-earth painting tutorials. Today we're going to be cracking on with one of the most famous hobbits of all time, Bandobras Took the Bull Roarer, the 4-foot tall hobbit who was able to ride a horse and won the Battle of Greenfields in the early history of the Shire. Big thanks to Games Workshop for sending me out his gorgeous sculpt in some wonderful new Middle-earth packaging. He was re-released recently alongside the Scouring of the Shire because he features in a scenario in the kind of epilogue at the end of the journey book. So we're going to have a bit of a battle report later on when he's all painted up, facing down with Golfimble, the evil orc chieftain who raided the Shire. So it's a gorgeous metal sculpt. We're going to be doing the foot and mounted version today, so we're going to have another look at a different way to paint some horses using some contrast paints. This is a really great model for contrast paints because you can literally bang it out really quickly. It's something that you can do without much effort or a lot of paints. There's a lot of kind of cool techniques we can have a look at that mean that we get a really nice finished hobbit who looks fantastic but doesn't take us too long to do. So as always, we first break down our model into our constituent painting zones. So for Bandobras we have the horse flesh, the horse hair, the horse hooves, the trousers, suspenders and hat, the white shirt, the skin tone, the steel detail, and the leather straps. So make sure we kind of develop a bit of a palette for all of those painting zones before we crack on. And I'll go through each of the different colors that we're going to be using as we get to them throughout the tutorial. As always, all the paints that we're going to be using in this video are linked down in the description, as well as a conversion guide so you can go back and forth between Citadel, Vallejo, P3, whatever painting range you guys want to use. So without further ado, let's crack on into painting the wonderful model Bandobras Took the Bull Roarer. Also, here's Franklin. Hi, Frankie. As always, the first thing to do is to give your model a nice even coat with your primer. I'm using the Wraithbone Contrast Primer, and the first layers that we're going to be putting down is working on our horseflesh. Now, we're going to be using Kygor Brown a lot throughout this scheme, and using it in different places in different concentrations to achieve different effects. And this is one of the really great uses of contrast paints, is that you can change the way that they behave by the way that you mix them with the contrast medium. So here we're going to be working on the horseflesh, and Kygor Brown is quite a dark brown, and I want to kind of warm it up a little bit by allowing the base coat to come through more, so I'm kind of diluting that with about 50-50% contrast primer and Kygor Brown. Now, as always, when you're applying your contrast paints, you want to try and get them down all nice and quickly so that you're not kind of re-agitating areas as they're drying. You want it to be all down and allow the kind of contrast agents to do their work and flow into the recesses. One thing I would say is that you want to make sure that the Kygor Brown, when it's diluted like this, isn't too thick. You've got to watch for pooling, and it can start to look quite unnatural as a skin tone. So we want to apply that mixture all over the horse flesh except for the very lowest sections of the horse's ankles, because what we're going to do is create some socks or some white patches coming up from the hooves, just like a lot of different types of horse breeds have. So when you get down to near the kind of horse kind of ankle areas, just grab a fine detail brush and start to create a few interesting shapes or patterns that are going to blend between that white socked area and the main horse flesh. And there we can see a lovely chestnut brown sort of horse tone for our flesh. Now we're going to work on the socks themselves, and we're going to grab some Apothecary White, which is the white paint from the contrast paint range, and we're just going to grab a whole bunch of that and slather it quite richly all over those ankles. It doesn't matter if you get them on the hooves themselves, because we'll be kind of going over that with a grey later on. I've chosen just to put socks on the two rear feet, because often the horses will only have the kind of white or bone kind of printings on two ankles rather than all four sets, but you can do them on all four if you like. While we wait for the socks to dry, the next thing we're going to do is work on Bandobras' trousers. Now I'm just going to grab some of that same mixture that we used for the horseflesh, which is our 50-50 Kygor Brown and contrast primer, and just apply that quite carefully all over the trousers and the leather straps that go up over his tunic or shirt. Don't worry too much if you get a little bit on the saddle, because we're going to be applying a darker layer over the top of that anyway, so that'll all just wash away into brown. And once you've picked out his trousers and his straps, we can also throw a little bit of that mixture onto his top hat. When you're doing the straps, it's really important that you take your time. Applying the contrast paints with a small detail brush to really small areas can be quite tricky. It's sort of like trying to do fine detail painting with a wash. Because of the viscosity of the paint, they can sort of flow onto those kind of areas that you're trying to keep them off quite easily. Now, to complete the ankles of our horse, we're going to grab some Basilicanum Grey for the hooves, and I'm actually going to put a couple of layers down over the course of this paint job, returning to them every now and then just to darken them up a little bit, and that'll give you a really nice kind of dark grey hoof tone, which looks quite nice in stark contrast to the brown and, of course, our white socks. So the horse is nearly finished. We're just going to do some work on the horse's hair. So I'm going to grab some Bone White from the Vallejo Game Color range, but Ushabti Bone from Citadel Games Workshop would work fine as well. And I'm just going to apply that directly to a normal palette, which in this case is my table, as opposed to the wet palette, because I don't want too much moisture in the paint, because we're going to be doing some dry brushing. So I grab myself quite a large dry brushing brush and kind of dab that on, and then take as much of the paint off as I can onto some paper towel, and then we just come in and give quite a nice kind of heavy dry brush to all of the horse's hair, working with the grain of the hair so that we're applying to the highest areas and not getting anything in the recesses, but we're not kind of creating any fake brush strokes across the color graduation. Now, the last piece of the puzzle for our horse is, of course, all of the leather work, the leather straps, the saddlery, and what we're going to be doing here is going back to our good old friend Kygor Brown and just using it completely undiluted. And you'll see that without any contrast primer, it's a much kind of deeper, darker, richer brown that almost looks quite different in tone because a lot less of that primer is coming through underneath. So use a fine detail brush and take your time with the leather straps and try and make sure that when you're applying it to the saddlery that you do keep it off his trousers, because that will stain it quite obviously. So with our horse basically finished, it's now to start finishing off Bandobras himself with our next big cloth layer, which is his white shirt. So once again, we're returning to Apothecary White and just going to carefully apply that all over his shirt. Now luckily, because the white is such a light color, if you spill a little bit onto the brown, it's barely going to show up at all, and you don't have to be particularly worried about the flesh tone because we're using flat layers over the top of that. So make sure you just get it nice and evenly and don't have any excess pooling, and you'll get a really nice toning of the white. This particular color lets a lot of the primer show through and is pretty much just focusing on creating recessed details, and it's a great way of quickly getting a white layer. Up next, we're going to do Bandobras' club with a little bit of Skeleton Horde. This is my absolute favorite contrast paint so far. It has a really gorgeous tonal saturation and doesn't pool or create over-pigmentation easily, and it just looks fantastic when it goes on. So just hit that nice and evenly all over the club. Make sure you get the little bit of handle under his hand as well. Now we're on to one of the final large remaining layers, which is of course our Hobbit skin tone. So I'm going to grab some Kislev Flesh, which is a layer paint, and put that straight down over the prime. Usually I'd put down Cadian skin tone or heavy skin tone from Vallejo as a base coat, but with the contrast primer I found that you can just go straight into the Kislev Flesh, and it's a really nice smooth application. So pick that out quite carefully. We've got his hands to do, as well as the crook of his neck underneath his shirt and his face as well. Make sure you keep the skin tone off his kind of sideburns and the hair at the back of his head, because we'll come back later and hit that with a little bit of a brown, and just make sure this layer is nice and even, and it should come up a treat. To finish off the skin, we're going to go straight into a Reikland Flesh shade, which is the fantastic Citadel Games Workshop shade, which is just gorgeous for all skin tones. And because the Hobbits are kind of sometimes a bit of a darker skin tone, they're not always kind of that really bright white Caucasian, they're kind of out in the sun, quite tanned. We're literally just going to leave that layer here with the Reikland Flesh shade and not bother adding any extra highlights, because we've got enough detail in there for the skin tone to really sing. Now the skin tone's finished, we're going to come in and finish off all our Hobbit hair. So we've got the hair on the back of the head, the sideburns, and of course the woolly hair on the Hobbit's feet. And to do that, we're going to be using some snakebite leather, and I'm going to apply a couple of coats of this just to make sure that there's a nice saturation of pigment. So with just a few key details left, it's time to jump into our lead belcher to crack on with all of the different silver bits and pieces. There's a few kind of buckles and bridles on the horse that needs to be all tied off, and these little kind of points of silver along with the stirrups, they just add some nice kind of highlights that catch the light when you're looking at the model and add that extra layer of detail. While we wait for that lead belcher to dry, I'm just going to grab a little bit more of our bone white from Vallejo and just give the club a bit of a dry brush to really accentuate the top highlights of that wood texture. Now to finish off our metalwork, we're of course going to grab the shade that shades them all, Nuln Oil, which is just a fantastic shade for working with silver from the Games Workshop Citadel range. We're just going to carefully apply that to all of our metalwork. We can be pretty liberal though. The great thing about Nuln Oil is if it kind of spills into any excess areas, it just looks like natural shadows. Make sure you get a nice concentration on the small metal details, and as it dries, it'll give them a really nice tone. And with our final layer down, our paint scheme is finished, and now we just have a couple of little steps left, which is of course our basing. Now I've decided to go for quite a kind of Hobbit Shireland theme with these bases by using the new flower packs from the Luke's APS range that you can buy over at zorpazorp.com, and combining them with some Scrubland base ready materials and a little bit of the mid-green foam flock, and applying that all together with the Luke's APS ready basing glue, and I think you'll agree that the bases look absolutely fantastic. Well, there we have it, guys. One of the most famous hobbits of all, sitting atop his rearing horse. Doesn't he look absolutely resplendent? He's a fantastic little model, really fun to paint, and I think he's come up pretty well and really fast. I've literally done that in like a couple of hours at most, and I was kind of dawdling and playing around with a few things. So definitely something you can achieve very easily and very quickly at home, because that's what we want to do, is we want to smash through these models and get them on the tabletop so we can dive into some scouring of the Shire battle reports. Make sure you guys stay tuned for that. We've definitely got, obviously, we're shaping up for some Bandobras versus Golfimble action in the Battle of Greenfields, but there's going to be a whole lot more scouring of the Shire action and a whole lot more hobbits and different kind of Shire and ruffian themed painting tutorials in the future. If you guys have got any requests for kind of other painting tutorials, different models you'd love to see me do, then drop them down in the comments below, and make sure you check out all the other Middle-earth content we've got here on the channel. And in the meantime, thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.